Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 13th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in the field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, "Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did all these weeds come from?" He answered, "An enemy has done this." The slave said to him, "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" But he replied, "No, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn." And then he left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples approached him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." Jesus answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers. And they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will rise like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen." The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Listening to the radio this week, I heard an interviewer interview someone from a laboratory in Montreal. It is a company that is working really hard to create a vaccine for the pandemic. And this is really good news. They talked about how long this might take, that they're ready to, send it off to the government for certain approvals and so on. There are certain steps that have to be followed along the way. And the interviewer asked, "Well, how long will this take? How long do you think it'll be before you actually have a vaccine, assuming everything goes right and everything goes well and the vaccine works and there's no bad effects? How long would it take until there's finally a vaccine on the market?" And she said it could be, sometime next August, maybe next September. And the interviewer said, "Well, that seems like, oh my goodness, that seems such a long time." And she said, "It does." She understood that, but she said, "Don't forget that the work we've done in the last 4 months is about the same amount of work that they would normally have done in the period of 5 to 6 years. They had accomplished that much work by working very diligently and very hard to try to fix this problem." So let us hope this vaccine or another one being worked on somewhere in the world isn't very far off. But not everything can be fixed. We don't even know yet if this pandemic can really be fixed, or if this is something we're going to have to learn how to live with. About 25 years ago now, the singer-songwriter Emily Saliers of the Indigo Girls wrote a song about a relationship in which the love between two people has fallen asleep. And she writes about the frustration that comes with the realization that as much as she wants to fix it, Nothing can really be done about this relationship. So long ago when we were young, she sings, we were taught that for whatever kind of puzzle you've got, you just stick the right formula in, a solution for every fool. I find that to be so true. We have been led to believe that anything broken can be fixed. A flat tire can be patched and filled with air and it's good to go. The economy can be fixed by adjusting interest rates or tax rates. Not feeling very good about yourself? Take these pills. Buy these clothes. Drive this car. Tired? Take a vacation. For whatever kind of puzzle you've got, we were taught to just stick the right formula in, a solution for every fool. Last Sunday, I suggested that the way to make sense of Jesus' parables is to ask ourselves, what is it about this parable that drives me crazy? What is it about what Jesus is saying that just rubs me the wrong way? What drives me crazy about this parable of the wheat and the weeds is the farmer's refusal to allow the servants to fix the situation. They're not allowed to go into the field and take the weeds away. They just have to live with the weeds. They just have to live with the evil until harvest time. Sure, when the plants were young, they looked similar enough that nobody knew that bad seed had been planted amongst the good. But now that the plants are bearing wheat, they're bearing fruit, it can easily be seen which ones are the good ones and which ones are the bad. Shouldn't they be weeded out, lest the weeds take up all the water and the nutrients of the soil, robbing the good wheat of a chance to thrive? Of course they should. The servants knew it. Jesus' followers knew it. You and I know it. There's a solution to this problem. Let's get in the field and fix it. But no, Jesus has the farmer say, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat among them. Allow both to grow together until the harvest. That had to drive the servants crazy. For a few summers in my youth, I worked for a vegetable farmer just outside of Fergus. The farm grew acres and acres of broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage. Part of our job was to walk up and down the rows of these vegetables with a very sharp hoe in hand, weeding the plants as we went. Not often, but occasionally, while we were weeding, a broccoli plant or a cauliflower plant might be taken out due to over-enthusiastic hoeing. And sometimes you could just take the plant and pluck it back in the soil and pat it down and it would be okay. But sometimes those plants were just lost. And those summer students who took out too many plants did not last very long on the job. This makes me wonder if in Jesus' parable, wouldn't any farmhand worth their salt have been able to enter the field and remove those weeds without too much trouble, without too much damage to the good wheat? But then we have to remember, this isn't a parable to explain good farming practices. It's a parable about the kingdom of heaven. And while there are indeed enough similarities between farming, producing food for the world, and heaven, that this parable works. There are some pretty big differences as well. Jesus is telling this parable to people just like you and I, who are desperately want to believe Jesus when he says that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. But when they would look around at the world around them, they could see plenty of evidence to question Jesus' thesis. For his Jewish followers, it was the reality that the promises that had been made to their ancestor Abraham, that they would become this great people that would be a blessing to all the nations of the world, this has obviously not come to pass. As they look back at their history, the last 1,200 years of their history before the time of Jesus, they could only point to 80 to 100 years of self-government where they were ruling themselves and not under the oppression of some other superpower or other. During Jesus' time, the superpower was the Roman Empire, possibly one of the most oppressive empires to govern them in all of that time. And you certainly don't have to look very far today to wonder what Jesus was talking about when he said the kingdom of heaven is at hand. What with the current pandemic, the realization that racism is still alive and well, more than 150 years since the emancipation of the slaves in the United States, and nearly 200 years since slavery was abolished in the British Empire. If this is what the world is like when the kingdom of heaven is at hand, I sure hate to imagine what the world would be like if the kingdom of heaven were far off. And so in this parable, Jesus is addressing the question that each of us have about the existence of evil in a universe and a world created and loved by God. And the answer that Jesus gives in this parable isn't all that satisfying. Evil exists. Evil affects our lives, and you cannot fix it. Not very satisfying at all. This takes me back to the sermon from a couple of weeks ago when we were looking at the reality of sin in the world, specifically the reality of the sin of racism. And you remember at that time, I showed a video clip of a woman named Dr. D'Angelo encouraging us not to ask, am I racist? Not to ask, is this sin of racism in me? But rather, how have I been shaped by the forces of racism that I was born into? Maybe you remember tackling that question a couple weeks ago. How was I shaped? How am I shaped by the forces of sin and racism that I was born into? In today's parable, when Jesus has the farmer tell the servants to allow the good and the bad seeds to grow together, it's much like Dr. D'Angelo's question. Recognizing the good and evil, recognizing that good and evil exist in the world together, how am I being shaped by the forces of evil that are in my world? It's a hard question to answer or to even deal with when what we really want to do is just fix it. Lock it up in prison. Shame evil into the dark corners where it can't be seen. Beat it into submission. But as Jesus shows us in this parable, our attempts to root out evil will also do a lot of irreversible damage to the good. So allow them to exist together, says Jesus, until it's time for the reapers. That is, someone else, not you, until it's time for the reapers to go in and deal with the bad fruit. It drives us absolutely crazy. So does that mean that we just let evil thrive? That we allow it to carry on doing whatever damage it's going to do? As the Apostle Paul might answer, by no means. And I think the parable of the wheat and the weeds shows us how to act in the face of evil. But you might not like this part either. Jesus says that an enemy has planted the bad seed in the field at night when everyone was asleep and then went away. It's obvious that it is the hope of the enemy that when the bad seed is finally shown for the weed that it is, the servants of the farmer will go into the field, trampling down the wheat, the good wheat, in order to remove the weeds. The enemy, in this parable, has rightly recognized that we are so obsessed with fixing what is wrong that we are going to be willing to sacrifice some of the good in order to squelch the bad. A plan that has not worked out very well in our history, as we've played into evil's hand time and time again, creating first and third world countries, creating disparities in wealth such as the world has never seen before. But in telling the servants to stay out of the field and allow the good and the bad to grow together, literally to suffer that they grow together, the farmer removes the mightiest weapon of the enemy, ourselves. The great leaders of the last century, Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., recognized this as nonviolence and non-cooperation with the evil of their times. Rather than teaching us to take up arms against evil, to fix the problem, Jesus, together with Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., teach us to simply not cooperate with it. Thus, it's not surprising that when Jesus came face to face with the most evil institutions, the government, the people of his own day, Jesus chose the cross as a holy response rather than a violent insurrection. Contrary to what we have been taught, there is not a solution for every puzzle. But look at the good news that is in this parable. In the kingdom of heaven that is at hand, the problems of evil are ultimately addressed by God, who deals with them not with the one-size-fits-all tools of violence and shame that we tend to tackle them with, but with divine tools of love and grace that actually transform us and the world. In the kingdom of heaven that is at hand, the burden of taking the responsibility for fixing everything that is wrong is removed from our shoulders. And what a relief that is. And because this burden is removed, in the kingdom of heaven that is at hand, we are free to respond to evil in the one very effective tool that God has given us, the freedom to address evil by choosing not to cooperate with it. And this is very good news indeed. Amen.